My name is Lara Özügergin, and I work for UNHCR's Turkey operation, and specifically in the field office in Istanbul. I'm a protection associate, and I have my background is in child protection in general. I'm coordinating the child protection working group in Istanbul, which includes participants from NGOs, INGOs, UN agencies, and most importantly, maybe the government. Many different governmental bodies are actually present in our coordination groups. But beyond that, I'm also involved in monitoring and supporting in terms of supervision our new child protection colleague that's directly involved in case management.
I'm wondering if maybe you can tell us a little bit around your understanding of supervision within case management, and why do you think it's an important component?
Well, within the past 4 years, I've come to realize that child protection is one of the most sensitive, key prioritized areas in humanitarian response, and case management as a tool of that response lies at the heart of protection, as it envisages the assessment of the needs, as well as individualized, coordinated, and multi-sectorial service delivery. And especially within refugee context, what I've come to realize is that child protection caseworkers are frequently faced with complex and multifaceted cases that require targeted, timely, and elaborate response on the individual and the family level. So in full recognition of the child protection guiding principles, and mainly the best interest of the child and do no harm, it's actually crucial that these caseworkers receive the support necessary to successfully address the needs of the people we serve. And to that end, regular, structured, and supportive supervision of caseworkers is essential to support the empowerment and well-being of children and their families.
What's your understanding of what we really mean by this terminology?
There are multiple definitions of supervision, especially within the humanitarian sector. And what I've seen before and after the training was that the general idea of supervision is very much aligned with the administrative duties and ensuring accountability, and to a certain extent ensuring that the capacity of the caseworkers are indeed at the level that would be able to address the needs of refugees in a sensitive manner. But what's deprioritized, if I may, is maybe even the staff well-being and staff care, which is, I feel, extremely important, because as we also underlined in the training, without ensuring the emotional and psychological well-being of caseworkers who are directly involved in the response, then it's quite likely that there will be harm, more so than anything else, for the cases that we actually do try to address. As was introduced in the training, there are different functions that the supervisor should ensure is in place, which includes the administrative functions, the developmental functions, and the supportive functions. And these all need to be very much in balance. I felt that was one of the main messages of the training itself in the program.
You said you had a lot of conversations about this as you rolled out the training, but can you tell us a little bit around some of those gaps and challenges that you've seen in Turkey?
Just to contextualize, Turkey has been hosting the largest refugee population worldwide since 2016 onwards, with approximately 3.8 million asylum seekers and refugees currently registered with the Turkish government. Remembering UNHCR statistics, 50% of all refugee populations worldwide, consisting of children, that are in need of protection against abuse, neglect, violence, and exploitation, it's really needless to say that many caseworkers in Turkey, and especially those in the field, are under significant pressure to comprehensively respond to the varying needs of children in a timely manner. It's also to be noted that the majority of the refugee population in Turkey reside in urban areas, and that brings on various limitations and challenges, especially compared to populations living in camp settings. What we see with only those statistics is that there's an extremely high number of identified children in need of specialized support. Most cases are of urgent nature, and hence a lot of the caseworkers in Turkey do experience challenges on a daily basis, as you were saying, to effectively support children and their families. One other aspect, I think, is that many of the caseworkers don't have social work backgrounds, so that means that there needs to be a very rigorous and continuous capacity development process with these caseworkers. what that at the end brings is that there really is a need for structured supervision that is regular, that is based on a trust relationship between the supervisee and supervision. But unfortunately, what we observed, especially following the trainings, is that supervision predominantly is carried out in an ad hoc manner, without the necessary tools, the devotion, and the time for supervision, and specifically in terms of staff care. I could say that many organizations are yet to strengthen their supportive systems to ensure the emotional and psychological well-being of caseworkers. I feel that the main gap with relation to supervision is that there is no structured framework or system in Turkey.
Who are the people who are typically playing the role of supervisor?
Usually persons who have experienced more than, I would say, a few years. But one of the outcomes of the training was that the relationship that was introduced through the program, which is not based on hierarchy, it's entirely based on a trust relationship that's transparent, and etc. That sort of relationship seems to be rare, let's say, in Turkey, because a lot of the participants stated that the system of supervision is more so the caseworker and the hierarchical relationship with the manager, which they call the boss. And that in itself is sort of preventive in establishing that kind of safe relationship that's built on trust.
How did people respond to this concept of like kind of shifting those dynamics and having someone who's playing the supervisory role that isn't so top down, but more of this like relationship and this idea of being like kind of a coach?
I think it was very much appreciated because again, it's very different to the current context of supervision in Turkey. They did recognize the importance of establishing that sort of relationship, but they also did say that this is a very cultural sort of issue that's just so rooted in Turkey that we might not be able to so easily deconstruct that and implement this sort of relationship that we were talking about in the training.
Can you tell me a little bit about like how you first became engaged in the training initiative and maybe a little bit about your experience?
What happened is that in July 2017, when the Case Management Task Force under the Alliance announced this initiative of intensive capacity development focusing on supervision and coaching, we were invited as country coordination groups to apply to join this initiative through the nomination of 5 to 6 key child protection representatives. So when the Southeast Child Protection Sub-Working Group coordinators came across this announcement, in partnership with the National Working Group, a comprehensive country application was prepared, and individual applications from potential nominees representing various INGOs and INGOs in all major areas of operation were collected and sent immediately to the Alliance through the National Child Protection Sub-Working Group. And in August, we found out happily that our application as Turkey was accepted, along with the successful applications from Syria and Iraq. So then we participated in the 5-day training. My personal experience with the program was extremely positive, as I thought that the initiative addressed an important gap in our country context. Having carried out casework for a significant duration, I was very much aware of the multiple challenges faced by caseworkers, especially in the absence of structured supervision practices and tools. So throughout the 5-day training, we were familiarized with the concept of supervision and the good practices around the matter. But what I found most important was we were provided with practical and effective tools that would allow us to establish dedicated systems upon return to our operations. Another aspect that I found was extremely useful was the interactive nature of the training, because it did give us a lot of space to basically discuss current supervision practices, the gaps, the achievements, and the good practices in relation to supervision. So upon return, when we rolled out the trainings, we really did realize that many organizations experienced similar challenges, and the main feedback we received over and over again was, this is extremely timely, this is really targeted in the sense that it addresses an important gap. And a lot of the feedback received also showed that the tools, the introduction of the tools was a really concrete output for everyone that participated. Specifically with the training in Istanbul, that was actually a very interesting training for us as well, because half of the participants consisted of officials from the Ministry of Family and Social Policies, which is the governmental body responsible to ensure the well-being of vulnerable groups. So having that participation from the officials enabled dialogue between the two parties and really allowed us to compare and contrast the perceptions and practices around supervision. And specifically for UNHCR, what happened after the training was that the ministry was very much interested in sort of rolling out the trainings to a pool of supervisors within the ministry. And this was very much aligned with UNHCR Turkey's strategic priorities to strengthen national institutions involved in refugee response. So for the trainings, what we did was we delivered everything that was introduced through the training package, because we thought that every single tool had its own added value within the larger case management process. We really didn't contextualize too much the tools, and we introduced all of them and basically told the organizations to contextualize internally, because what we realized was that the 7 practices of supervision actually are being implemented by the organizations, but very informally. So what we allowed through the trainings is to basically gain structure in the current practices through all of the tools. So we didn't exclude any of them. I think all of them, and specifically the individual platforms and the group platforms to discuss case management, those were the most efficient.
And what about follow-up with the training participants who have been engaged in the process thus far?
And what I can say is that we provided the soft copies through emails, through the coordination group, to the participants. The major follow-up, I feel, will be the joint project with the ministry that's being piloted, that will be piloted in Istanbul, but that has sort of the opportunity to nationalize, hopefully. So I think the major follow-up here will be more so on the governmental side, because what we're planning is to sit down with all of the participants that joined the pilot training in Istanbul, contextualize the tools, and then implement them, basically, for the government.
Anything in particular that you want to highlight that you've learned through this process?
Upon return from the training received in Amman, what we did as the Turkey team was sit down and review all the materials, including the presentations, activities, and handouts, to be able to address the gaps and needs across the stakeholders in Turkey. So my suggestion to anyone that's interested in utilizing the package would be to first conduct a needs assessment or situational analysis in the country's context in relation to supervision prior to contextualizing the material. We were lucky enough because one of the universities in Istanbul had already conducted a needs assessment with the government and various NGOs involved in refugee response. So we sort of built our contextualization process on that. Another, I think, lesson learned is that the program was designed to have a very interactive nature, even including this interview session. So in the training, we were encouraged, and we tried to also reflect this in our rollout processes, we were encouraged to discuss our current context, the gaps that we identify, and the good practices. And all of this was carried out in a very safe environment where we were able to share very freely. So I think the general success of the program very much depends on that sort of interactive nature. And again, as we also saw that as a feedback in our rollout training.
So I'm wondering if there are any last reflections or points that you'd like to share from your overall experience.
Some of these issues, including supervision, are sort of somehow deprioritized because we usually deal with, especially in refugee contexts, we deal with matters that are extremely urgent, that require complex response. So some things, including supervision, staff welfare, etc., can be deprioritized. So to have a targeted, sort of specialized capacity development initiative that was accessible to so many different regions across the world was I think it's extremely important to know that someone is supporting this practice, and a group of people are recognizing the importance of supervision in humanitarian and developmental contexts.